Med school so far has brought me head on with a lot of new challenges that I do not think I would have been prepared for if I didn't have the right systems in place. And if you're anything like me, when deadlines and assignments start to stack up outside of class, you learn that if you don't have the right structure there, things can all come crumbling down. And if you're new here, my name is Pierce. I'm a second-year medical student in the US. And fortunately, in the time I've spent in school now, I've been able to come up with some key habits that have helped me glide through med school a bit more easily. So for context, for the past decade or so of my life, I've been absolutely obsessed with anything that has anything at all to do with habits. So for reference, I've read books like Atomic Habits, The Power of Habits. I've watched countless YouTube videos, listened to podcasts, read many other books. That's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. And a lot of the people around me can attest to this, that growing up, this was something I was very interested in. Now, with that said, as you can imagine, a lot of things have changed for me recently, especially through undergrad and then after starting medical school. A lot of those habits that I used to try out are no longer with me. And then there are a few that maybe I didn't expect that are still with me today. And in this video, it's kind of going to be my reflection of all the habits and the things that I've learned along the way, the things that I still use today. And I'm sure you'll be able to get something useful out of it. It's going to be kind of like a reminder to myself of why I've kept certain things around and then certain things to avoid. Starting with the first habit that I actually kept around, which is a consistent bedtime. Now, I think most habit or productivity videos and books that I've read have kind of done me a disservice because yes, they do say that it is good to be consistent with your bedtime, but they don't actually explain it. So without that kind of explanation, I kind of slip into the mentality that in general, being more consistent is better. And overall, I would say that's generally true. But specifically with consistency of sleep, I found that there are a lot more small rewards outside of the main reward of just being consistent. I want to kind of explain some of those here. And the real reason I'll share with you that it actually works for me in just a second. But for a little bit of context, in college, I actually was the classic stereotypical night owl. I would go to bed very, very late, often shut down the library at 2 a.m. when everything was closing, and I would be in there starting like 6 p.m. That was my deep work block, was at night. And honestly, I kind of wanted to be a morning person always. I just thought that I had a chronotype that could not be changed. So I thought that basically I was a night owl. I just kind of had to embrace that. As much as I wanted to be a morning person, every time I woke up in the morning, I would feel dead tired. And this was just a consistent theme across college. I would try not to schedule any of those pesky 8 a.m. classes. I would just be at the 10 a.m. lectures and past, and then I would reserve my night block for studying. Now, this did work well for me in college, and it's a strategy that didn't really impact my productivity at all. But now that I've shifted into medical school and I'm actually required to be places earlier in the morning, it was key that I actually found out a way to wake up earlier in the morning. So even after I kind of adopted the fact that I'm not a morning person, I actually found that there's sort of a reset, this unspoken reset that happens with your body when you start going to bed at the same time every night. And again, something I want to emphasize throughout this point is that it doesn't really matter the time that you go to bed. For me, I decide the time that I go to bed and wake up based on when my first requirement is of me, and then try to make that as consistent as I can throughout the week. For you, that may be something different. But what you will find is that if you start going to bed at the same time every night, at least for me personally, my energy levels started to know what was going on. So the way I kind of like to think about this is that your body is like a battery. When you go to bed and wake up at different times every single day, sure, you're technically not being consistent, but from my opinion, the thing that's actually more important with that is what your body starts to do. It starts to be confused on when it should preserve your energy and when it should use energy, because it doesn't reliably know when that battery is going to get a recharge. But if your body knows that at the same time approximately every night and at the same time every morning you're going to be waking up, it's kind of like your body starts to lose that fear and be able to tap into that bottom 20 or 30% of energy that you store up every day. This is purely based on my experience and isn't based on any research or anything like that. If that's something that y'all are interested in, I can do that in the future. But what happens when your body is not sure what time you're going to go to bed? It starts to just go into survival mode and assume that you're going to be up for the longest duration that your body is typically awake. So even though you really need to do something at night or tap into that energy and be more consistent, your body is holding on to it because it doesn't know when it's going to get rest. But if you're very consistent with it, you'll start to notice that you're always tired at the same time and you always want to wake up at the same time because those levels kind of just stabilize. So all this to say, when that battery doesn't know when it's going to get a recharge, it's going to try to hold on to that energy and not give you all the benefits of your rest. Whereas if you know reliably what time you are going to be going to bed and waking up, you start off with a full battery every morning and slowly lose energy throughout the day. And I'm always reminded of this whenever I change anything around with my sleep. For example, I was doing a lot of travel over the holidays and I noticed that my energy levels just started to be shot because my body, again, didn't know what to expect. Now that I'm coming back from break and I'm back on my rotations here, I am ready to go. I feel a lot better. So just kind of having that reminder, I would recommend trying it out if you haven't already. It's something I love. So as you can imagine, coming from from a night owl to where I am now, there was a big transition period that had to happen. And what I did for that personally was I actually noted down what time I went to bed and woke up every single night for almost 5 months straight. And this was just in a Google Sheet that I had on my computer. I would put it in the morning whenever I woke up. And even though I wasn't necessarily trying to be super strict on myself and, penalize myself when I got something wrong, it's more so about being aware at least of the times that you go to bed and wake up. So I would say it's probably going to help you even if you continue to go to bed sporadically, to just be aware of those times. So for me, obviously being in medical school, I found that my sleep and learning and retention obviously go very hand in hand, as much as I wish I could substitute this with caffeine sometimes. And the vibe I get from, again, my past self and my classmates is that whenever we're really tired, it usually just has to do with the simple fact that we went to bed the night before too late. It obviously happens, but it's like rarely do you see somebody that the primary reason that they're not getting enough sleep is because they're waking up too early every day. It's almost always going to bed too late. And that's why for me, I feel like prioritizing bedtime is one of the most important things. And yes, you may already be asking, but for the weekends and weekdays, I do try to keep those the same. Obviously with medical school, I have plenty of work to be doing most of the time anyways. And so it actually helps me to just be consistent, wake up and get my work done. That way I have the afternoons to enjoy and go to bed. But just staying consistent overall just makes it so that when you go back on Monday, you're not trying to change this every single week and confusing your body. If you're going to stick with it as best you can. Obviously things come up, so give yourself a little bit of lenience, especially when you're first starting out, but it's like a muscle. The more you do it, the more you'll get used to it. So that brings us to key habit number 2 that I kept around, which is to have a ranked plan of tasks for the next day. So what this is that usually the night before on a whiteboard, a notebook, or on my phone, I will ask myself the question, what is the one thing that if I do it tomorrow and I get this done, it will have been a successful day? And I'll usually just create a numbered list, more than one thing. So 1, 2, 3, sometimes 5 things for the next day. And I will think of those things that need to be done. I will go ahead and deload those from my brain. That way I don't have to think about them the next morning when I wake up or at night when I'm kind of tossing and turning. It just reduces the friction from the next morning. And so I know if I don't do this, I will either be a little bit too slow for my preference of getting out of the apartment in the morning and knowing what I'm going to go ahead and do, or at least have a little bit of decision fatigue. Obviously, we all know that you have to use some of that mental bandwidth every morning to make a decision about what you want to do in the first place. And if you're able to reduce that burden, it's kind of like setting your clothes out mentally the night before is kind of what I think of it as. And it helps a lot. I've done it basically every single day since starting medical school. And usually this number one task ends up being the thing that I'm most dreading or anxious about. And so what you actually find is that those are the things that will give you the most reward for completing them. And to go hand in hand with that, if you were to design your list of what you're going to be doing the next morning and you were dreading that thing and you know you have to do it that same day, you're probably not as likely to force yourself to put that thing as number one. Whereas the night before, you're like, oh, my tomorrow self's got it. And for me, I don't know, maybe that's like a 5%, like very small benefit, but it helps enough to where I can justify making the list the night before and putting the things that I know, even if I don't want to do them, like eat the frog, as they say, I'll do those the next morning and get them done. And the last component of this habit, at least, is that you want to be pretty flexible with this. So what I found is that this actually changes a lot. It's not some rigid permanent structure where I'm like always doing, lecture in the morning first thing, and then second thing is, my reviews and then research after that. You have to be adaptable every single day because some days something as simple as like compliance and getting some documentation done for your school could come up, and that might be the first thing you have to do the next day. Or if you want to do something like a project like I'm doing right now with YouTube, you kind of have to decide every single night the night before. And again, that's all the more reason to just go ahead and figure it out then, because it's always going to be changing. So be flexible with it. Habit number 3 that I've kept around is protect your 3 hours. If I were to offer you something that you could take that would allow you to work twice as fast through what you had to do for, a portion of your day for any given task, you'd probably give up a whole lot for that, right? I mean, working double as fast for 3 hours on something. Well, the fact of the matter is that you actually already have this inside of you. And I'm not really into the whole hocus pocus, exactly 2 times as much brain power at this time or anything like that. I've just found that generally people have, a couple hours a day. It doesn't even have to be exactly 3 hours where they're just generally more productive. And so the way I kind of think about this as well, that put this in perspective for me, is that at least on the flashcard system we use in medical school on Anki, you can actually see the times of day where you get cards right the most. So if you go ahead and look at that without changing anything in your life right now, you can actually probably see, if you use that application, when do you get cards right the most for what period of, 2, 3, 4 hours in the day. those are your magic hours, and you want to protect those as best you can. So going back to the whole sleep and my undergrad days conversation that we were talking about earlier, I would find that when I wasn't super consistent with my sleep, my most productive time, that 3-hour time block for me in the past, without even knowing it, was probably 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. And the reason for that was I didn't give that time to myself beforehand. I knew that I was going to schedule my lectures as the first thing in the day for me, and then after that, it just so happened that usually on a Monday to Friday weekday, the times that I did finally have to myself was times when everybody else was already asleep. So it was 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. when I wasn't disturbed and before the library closed. So I decided towards the end of undergrad and when I started medical school that I kind of wanted to have more say over when those 3 hours were going to be. So when I set up my kind of consistent sleep time, again, going back to the battery thing that we were talking about before, I found that just by being consistent with sleep time and just by my body being able to anticipate when its energy levels were allowed to be high and when it was allowed to kind of run on fumes, that those 3 hours were from about 30 minutes after I woke up to, 3.5 hours after I woke up. So those 3 hours I try to protect every single morning. And since then, over a year ago, I've been doing that every single morning. And I won't go into the science of it, but it basically just has to do with your cortisol levels throughout the day. It's probably going to be a little bit different for everybody, but let's talk about what you can get out of this. So given that you're able to be more consistent with your sleep and wake times, regardless of when that time is for you, whatever you prefer. You may have heard the saying, it's not about what you do in your 9 to 5, it's what you do in your 5 to 9. And I know it's kind of a business reference, but what it refers to here is that 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. before your 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. shift, or whatever a traditional job shift is for you. For me, that's, being at the hospital or, being in lecture, or your 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. You can choose when that is for you. Are you somebody that knows that you study best in the morning, or do you know you're going to have interruptions in the morning, you don't have a place to work, and that evenings are the best for you? Whatever it is, this habit is basically all about protecting that time. Use this period for a few hours a day where your brain is absolutely the sharpest to focus on, again, that ranked list that we just talked about before this, the 1, 2, 3, 4 for the day that you're going to get done. And trust me, you will do tremendously more than you could have imagined with it. And the last part of this habit is literally about the opposite, which is the bane of the existence of these 3 hours, which I call the ADHD tasks, which are like responding to texts, communications, emails, small forums, busy work, the busy work of our lives, right? So you want to try to batch that, right? Such that it doesn't occur in those 3-hour time blocks, right? How helpful is it when you're in the middle of doing some deep work on a research project or learning a new concept for the first time that your brain's trying to wrap itself around, if you get pinged by an email or text message and have to divert your attention every 10 minutes? It's just not going to happen, right? So anything that's fragmented, focus based, just go ahead and keep that outside of those 3 hours. It's like trying to mix oil and water together with those two things. Key habit number 4 is combined between meal prep and exercise. And starting with meal prep, this all comes down to saving myself time and stress. But thinking about it now, it's probably also saved me a lot of money and just thought that I wouldn't otherwise have to put into figuring out where my food's gonna come from. But a couple of months ago, for reference, I bought myself a chest freezer. So it is a little bit of an investment up front, but I believe it will fully pay itself off, and it already is kind of continuing to. And what I do is, for me personally, I meal prep like 2 weeks of food at a time. And so I really only have to think about this every other weekend when I'm making my food. Right now, what I've stuck with is chicken, rice, and vegetables, just the basics. It's super flexible, so I can throw it in my book bag and move it around if I'm going, on rotations at the hospital. The other thing is that if I end up getting food elsewhere, or it's provided to me, or I go out with some friends to grab food, that food isn't going anywhere. It's frozen, it's preserved. I have it, saran wrapped and closed off. It's all good. It's gonna last a while. So sometimes I find that usually it lasts me actually like 3 weeks, and that's just one less thing I have to worry about. So any of those kind of small incremental changes that you can implement to take off some of the mental burden, especially when you're doing work all day like in medical school, the better. And so exercise kind of goes without saying, but for this one, I found that around like 3 or 4 times a week, just getting my body moving is what works best for me. So the gym I go to is for students, and fortunately is just a walk away from the hospital and my lectures. So I'm able to get there pretty efficiently. And so when it comes to workouts, I'm actually very workout agnostic is kind of what I would call myself. Like I have, been cross country running in the past. I love running. I also love lifting weights, calisthenics, stretching, you name it. And that changes on a day-to-day basis. So, just a word of encouragement for anybody out there. It's not really about what you do. Are you getting your heart rate up every day? Are you staying active? If your compliance goes up, that's really what we're focused on. And then after that, we can worry about the semantics of what you're actually doing in the gym. This is a kind of reminder to myself personally, because if I feel like I don't want to lift super heavy weights that day, I just remind myself, hey, I can go on a 10-minute run, or vice versa, right? So this just keeps me a lot more accountable, decreases the stress stress. At the end of the day, exercise should be an outlet from all the other things we have going on our plate anyway. So yeah, that's helped a lot. And so for me also, this stabilizes my energy levels a lot throughout the day actually. And I found that if I'm in that kind of afternoon slump, this is a perfect time to go to the gym. The other thing is that I think a lot of people misconstrue basically their physical health and their mental health as two completely separate things. So they are different, but I think there's a lot more overlap than people talk about. That's because your brain is literally a part of your body, right? So we're not going into all the science here right now, but keep in mind that all of the blood flow, inflammation, things that are going on in your body right now will affect your brain, and that in turn affects literally the way that you perceive the world around you and you interact with other people. So the more you're able to keep that healthy, the more your interactions and your perceptions of life are able to stay happy as well. And I kind of have to remind myself that a lot of times as well. Usually after workout, I feel much better, even if I was super tired beforehand. It kind of just reminds me of that. And so the fifth habit that's actually stuck around for me is a little bit of a reminder mixed with a habit, and that's it's okay to study away. So this one has actually been a very big shift in the way that I kind of approach academics in the last few years. I think growing up in the school system, I was always taught that working as a team is better, the more the merrier. And so you have to kind of shift that mindset, obviously, when you get into academics. And granted, it's always good to have a sense of community around you, right? You don't want to isolate yourself. You always want to stay close with your friends and be able to kind of, share that enjoyment around. But that said, I have actually basically started studying alone 99% of the time, I will say, in medical school, and I keep my academic studies and social life almost always separate from each other now. And I'll give you the reason for that. So I'll break it into studying alone in a way. So the first component, alone, for me, when I'm in a group, basically inevitably there's going to be some conversations in the friend group about drama that's occurring in the class, or people complaining about a particular lecturer, or a particular component of the course that they're really unhappy about, or they're just going to be joking around. And honestly, you can't blame people, right? We all want to have a bit of enjoyment when we're with our friends. I see this as healthy, natural entropy. This is like the natural state of, friends hanging around each other. You want to joke around, you want to enjoy each other's company. So with that said, the drawbacks now outweigh the benefit I get from studying alone, and I think a lot of med school students can attest to this. More and more of what we have to do requires deep thought, and you just can't get into that state, that natural flow state of learning when you're around other people all the time, unless you're very, very synchronized. So that's studying alone, and the second part is about studying away, and this isn't always the case, but sometimes I found that if I'm, in my medical school or in the medical library, somewhere in a public space where other medical students are studying, sometimes it can get a little bit tiresome and feel almost a little bit competitive. But what I've noticed is that people, even if they're studying alone, will kind of walk up to each other, at least in, say hi. Number one, that's going to cause interruptions in the flow of studying. Obviously, there are study rooms, and even then people can kind of walk in and interrupt. But the second thing is that they might start to ask kind of like how much work you've done or how far along you've come for studying for a certain exam. And this is me being a little bit vulnerable here, but I feel like sometimes it can almost come across, obviously if it's the wrong person, as somebody trying to kind of square themselves up to you. It's only natural because at the end of the day, in medical school, you are in a competitive field. So other people always are going to kind of want to know what a sense of what everybody in the group is doing. But with that being said, I think having a breath of fresh air and kind of studying somewhere that not everybody else in your medical school class is, for me, has been a huge benefit, whether that's studying in a coffee shop or even in another portion of the school where people just don't happen to study that are studying the exact same things as me. At the end of the day, it is a personal preference, and I tend to still keep a bit of variety with this. So with each of those habits being said, I do kind of want to reflect now, given my experience of experimenting with a bunch of different things, of what I learned to maybe avoid or some of the nuance when you're considering a habit to choose. So as with anything in life, a little bit can go a long way, and there is always a way to overdo it. So I remind myself that habits are basically about removing friction from my life. They're not about increasing the things that I have to do and the burden that I already have. And the balance between those two things can be very tricky, because sometimes when you're first adding a habit, it does feel like a burden, and you just know that you have to give it a little bit of time before it takes the load off of you. Regardless, if you try to incorporate too many of them at one time, number one, your adherence is going to kind of just fall through the floor. You're not going to be able to stay on top of any one of them, and you probably just end up dropping all of them. And you may find yourself spending more time doing the actual habits themselves than spending the time that the habits were meant to free up for you to be able to do in the first place. Now, I say this from experience because it's happened to me, but just try to be a little bit conscious. Reflect after, 30 days of incorporating a habit on whether or not it's helping or hurting you. So what I found to work best is that if you're going to try something new, maybe add 1-2 things at a time and no more. And another thing is that counterintuitively, if you're anything like me, and the other thing I just alluded to is that counterintuitively, if you are anything like me and you try to to kind of add a new habit that you're super excited about without fully committing to it for a long time, you actually end up spending more time, thinking and trying out the habit than you do getting rewarded by the habit. Now, not everything's going to stick, but when this happens, it is kind of like taking a step forward just to take a step back, right? So you don't end up anywhere. You do learn though. So at the end of the day, none of this is about being perfect or optimized 24/7. It's simply not going to happen. But on those days when things start to get really heavy and you just don't have the time to decide on every single thing that you're going to do, you can fall back on your systems. And again, this happens to me time and time again, where I remind myself of that in medical school. But if there's one takeaway, you don't need to change everything. You can just change one thing at a time to inevitably kind of build a structure that works for you, for the version of yourself that you're trying to become. So you should now have a better grasp on some of the habits that have actually stood the test of time and stuck around with me, that helped me immensely in medical school. Feel free to leave a comment below. And if you want more future videos about med school insight, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming.